Welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast, where we bring powerful voices and life-changing stories straight to your ears. I'm your host, Chris Dabbs, and today we're diving into a book that packs decades of wisdom into a fast, practical read. Our guest is Michael Allen Bell, a cybersecurity risk advisor, application developer, and seasoned computer science instructor with over 40 years of experience. His new book, 4040, 40 years of career and life advice in 40 minutes, distills 4 decades of career insight into a concise and impactful guide for anyone looking to level up their professional life. So whether you're just starting out or navigating the later chapters of your career, this conversation is full of perspective, practical advice, and motivation. So let's get into it. So first off, should I call you Michael or Mike? Mike.
I go by Mike. I put Michael on the cover because there's so many Mike Bells in the world. It's hard to be distinctive, but
Absolutely. No, I get it. Okay, fine. So I'll tell you what, let me call you Michael then. Let's just keep that
Okay.
the same thing. Okay. So nice to meet you then. So, okay, let's start. I've got loads of questions for you. What inspired you to compress 40 years of career wisdom into just 40 minutes of reading? That's amazing. Was there a moment that sparked the idea for this particular format?
well, I've kept a lessons learned file at work, added to it on occasion, particularly when something really good happened or something really bad happened. And I sensed it was time to take this and try to organize it and make it useful for others. Besides, I've always wanted to write a book, and this seemed like the natural time and opportunity.
Wow. Hey, that's a good idea, actually. Keep a journal, right? Of
Right.
good and bad things. All right. Do you know what? I might start that as well if I steal your idea there, I think. Okay, so the trouble is, of course, over 40 years, you have so many entries in that journal, I presume, right? So, how did you decide what advice to cut? What made the final cut? Was there anything especially tough that you had to leave out that maybe you could use in another episode, or not episode, but another installment in a series?
Well, most of the content made it. I omitted the longer and more complicated items. I do have material that I would like to do another book on cyber risks and another one on leadership. But anyway, tried to keep it slim and a quick read. Uh, I am I try to read it and look at it and as to anything that could be misconstrued as crude or crass, or oh, when I'm hearing this instead of writing it, can it be taken the wrong way? I try to squeeze out anything potentially offensive. The challenge was taking the content, categorizing it, and organizing it, because I just put these rules and ideas down in random order, and it was a challenge to pull them out, put them in categories, and usually when I'm starting writing something, I'll start with the outline and then fill out. Here I had a whole bunch of material that I had to put into some kind of order.
Which must have been interesting, considering it's your life history or your career history, right?
A lot of it.
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. So you're a cybersecurity expert, correct?
Yes.
Right. But so is everything in the book to do with your history as a cybersecurity expert, or are there other parts of your life that you've included?
Oh, it's not about cybersecurity. There's just maybe one or two items that touch directly on cybersecurity, but those items also touch on other wider aspects of life. There's a little blurb about the insider threat, but that's not purely a cyber situation. Anyone that has business or family concerns should be concerned about uh, what they portray and how it can be taken and be misused. So, uh, again, the principles in the book are fairly broadly applicable.
Sure. Right. Okay. At the time of recording this, it's the day after a power outage in Spain and France and Portugal. Now, we don't know the answer to this question, so I don't think we're ever going to know the answer. But and I'm not really asking you to speculate on the causes, but there are rumors, of course, of a cyber attack and things like that against the equivalent of the national power grid. Is that something that you worked on, the security for those sorts of projects, or was it more to do with home defense and that sort of thing?
Not directly power grid, not directly home defense. I work at a government facility, and we make products for use by the federal government. And so we're protecting that enterprise from attack. My particular job is taking proposals for new technology and evaluating it for risk and trying to ascertain, is it too risky to say yes to, or how we would say yes? What are the conditions? What are the possible considerations that need to be applied with the approval to lower the risk to an acceptable level?
Excuse me. I find that fascinating, actually, because I know that there are issues about, say, hardware with hardware backdoors, or I mean, I'm no expert, obviously, but if is that the kind of thing you're looking at? So whether or not there are any ways in, that aren't obviously supposed to be there.
Well, one thing you look for, okay, we're not like Underwriters Laboratories or the British equivalent of that. We don't do product testing, but one thing that we can do, and pretty much anyone can do, is look at the supply chain. Are you purchasing products from authorized sellers versus something that's cheap on the gray market that might come with features that weren't in the original specs? So authorized sellers, verifying the authenticity of products, particularly if you download software. Usually there's a checksum or a CRC calculation you can do to say, okay, is this thing exactly like the original, or has it been tainted in some way? And the third thing is getting vendor or community support. In other words, apply security updates. Software is such that it has to be almost always, never say always, but almost always you have to apply security updates, because there's this constant cat and mouse game between things that people use and those that would like to exploit it for advantage, for infiltration of control mechanisms, exfiltration of data, corrupting, being malicious, what have you. And so you would look for vendor updates. And anytime a product goes out of support, that's an elevated risk. That would, you say that, particularly if you're running a business. Running a business is oftentimes about risk, which is about money and cost and liability. When something's out of support, that makes it a good candidate for being upgraded or moving on to the next successor product.
Or some bad actor pretending there's a new upgrade for it, and
sure,
people falling for it, right?
That's that gray market aspect that, you get it off, Fred in the alleyway versus from a seller that's approved by the vendor.
And I think we've seen that with hardware, haven't we? That's been tainted in the supply chain recently. The walkie-talkies, wasn't there, or something that was set to explode? There you
go.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, Mike, I think you and I, we can have a conversation about this for ages, and I think it's fascinating for our listeners. But also, I mean, getting back into the book, I mean, this is the thing. How can you have a book that's really lean but very, very deep? We're talking about some subjects here that you could talk about, or we could talk about for ages. I mean, Because it's so lean and you've had to actually look and distill everything down, what are you hoping that readers walk away with immediately after reading it? Some ideas or some inspiration?
Well, it will depend on the reader,
Hmm.
the person, your needs as to what you would take away from the book. I candidly admit that your mileage may vary, that some parts may be more applicable to your situation than others. Use the best, forget the rest, I say. The very back of the book, where I talk about life, forgiveness, and judgment, that's the very most important part of the book. But beyond that, in general, again, it will depend on what the reader needs. For most people, there's a section I end with called Themes That Emerged, and then there's a front section called Key Lessons. That's the mostest value for the mostest people.
Hmm.
And then again, the things that come out of that are time utilization, efficient but minimally restrained communication, an appreciation of the past. These are the keys to sustain progress. Most people would, I think, find the most value in those aspects. Um, the intended takeaway is how to better succeed with reduced failure and quicker recovery from failure, leading to an overall successful career trajectory. Now, I've had a successful career, but it's not been as successful as it could have been if I had avoided some very simple mistakes. And if I'd known better, don't know if I would have paid attention when I was younger,
Hmm.
but at least, you lead the horse to water, whether they drink or not, I don't know. But anyway, that's the intention, is to make it better. One of the things that you hear on the internet and motivational speakers, I call it the baseball analogy, where they talk about in the major leagues, someone that has a 2.50 batting average will make a salary. Someone with a 3.0 major or batting average in the majors would generally make $3 or $4 million more per year. And if you average that out over a baseball season, the difference is one extra hit a week, just one. And so the moral of the story is a little bit of improvement can rack up big dividends over time.
So that's called like incremental gains or something like that. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're talking about this and talking about, looking at these incremental gains and things like that. You talk in the book about patterns to achieve success. You've already mentioned, something like that for a ball player. But can you share a pattern or habit that changed the trajectory of your own career? So, did someone give you some advice, or did you just pick something up? Share that with us. It'd be great to know.
Okay. I had the benefit of working for my second professional boss, who was a real visionary and very aggressive in the best sort of way in terms of wanting to improve his game. From him and from the tools he was using, I came to an appreciation of using outlines to structure thoughts and organize communication. Very early on, I'm going to date myself. In the 80s, we had something called PC Outline, which is like, man, the greatest tool on earth. I mean, even today, nothing like it in terms of like sitting down and cranking out an outline to organize your thoughts. Later on, I was introduced for my programming career, to rapid prototyping, piloting a solution before trying to solution the full Monty product. In other words, you know, learn as you're going, get the kinks out, and try to avoid building in big mistakes that cause time and effort later to pull back out. And there are several methodologies for stage delivery. There's Spiral Model from Barry Bain, Scrum, Agile, and more recently DevOps. The key to all these is to start small with manageable, lower risk, and functional and usable deliverables. Start, build down, and then build out and build to last. In other words, try to build things you're going to keep. Improve, yes, but keep, not build and then throw away and start over. That way you can build a incrementally improvable modular product that's easier for solving problem solving and for innovation.
And so this is Amazon are very good at that, aren't they? Rapid prototyping. They issue updates many times a day, sometimes, right?
Yes, all of the major, I say all is a bad word, but many of the major techno leaders employ, and even smaller ones that are like, really great in their field, have used this DevOps methodology to rapidly design and implement small incremental improvements, which can be delivered faster, provide more immediate value to the customer, and because they're smaller, they have inherently lower risk and quicker payback than big monolithic projects.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess we could talk about that and say, if we look back to when was it? Was it in November when that cybersecurity update crashed a whole bunch of, well, most Windows machines?
Right.
Yeah. So that was, I guess the update for that was, I don't know, was it a small update or what does the industry say? Or was it too big?
I think in that particular instance, it was small, but it was critical.
Yeah.
And I don't know the particulars on that. I know it was, it had a critical place in the supply chain. And so, testing would have, how much testing is enough in that particular case? Well, not enough, obviously. So, switching kind of the idea of risk again, everything of value requires security, and the level of security is should be commensurate with the value. And so, this product, I'm trying to think if it was. Well, I don't want to mention a vendor because
No,
I don't want to get either of us sued. But it had a critical place in supply chain and also in cyber protection, and so it's the kind of thing that probably would have released and tested more thoroughly. Now, I mentioned DevOps, and the idea there is you release, and because the risks are small, you generally fix rather than try to catch. But if the product is in a critical niche where the potential consequences are higher, obviously you would do more verification work up front. Again, I'm not saying I would know enough to have avoided the problem. I'm not Mr. Know-it-all, but
sure.
But the lesson learned would be, I'm sure that their testing and verification regimes are quite different today than they were before the incident.
Well, we have to hope so. So, talking of things like that, then, what common career mistake do you see even the most talented people and teams make? I mean, and how can it be avoided, do you think? I mean, depending on obviously what the mistake is.
Well, I think for many, and particularly starting out, not distinguishing what's important from what's unimportant, what matters from that which in the end is of low consequence. People that burn bridges and waste time, those are, mistakes that are commonly made, especially starting out. Clumsy jesting, where you're trying to be funny in front of a group of people and you end up looking mean or foolish instead of funny.
Right.
And people form impressions that they carry with them. And that's, again, common to starting out. Also, more for beginners, the belief or giving the impression that you know more than other people. And you find this particularly people that have the latest training out of college, out of trade school, and they come in, they know more about, some of the hottest technology than people that have been around a long time. But they don't have the wisdom and the experience that, or the the knowledge it takes to apply things using incorporation in a business environment, in a team environment, and taking into account the people factor.
Mm.
And so you find people like, well, oh, I know more than you do. And they feel like those that are around are saying, well, not so much, let's learn from each other, but you need to cool your jets a little bit.
Cool your jets, like it. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the problem, isn't it? It's a temptation, newly trained, very keen, just get out there without really realizing what's going to happen with the team that you're working with. No, I get that. So that sort of moves on as well, really, to my next point, which is, I guess, what, in your view, is the difference between hard work and impactful work? So is this, do you think, working harder, working smarter? Well, what do you think about that?
Exactly. That's the bromide, work smarter, not harder.
Mm.
Impactful work is effective work, and the least effort, most economical to achieve desired outcomes and allow for exploring avenues for greater achievement. The resources that are saved can enable the pursuit of future opportunities. I'll give an example. In the book, pages 49 and 50, I talk about some of my early work that I've done. I've had to move from one thing to another, wide sweep of topics. For a while, I was into ion optics, charged particle beams, and it started out as a means of heating fluids for fusion energy applications.
Right.
About the same time, you had, Star Wars came out, and you had the Strategic Defense Initiative. Reagan, started that, and they called it Star Wars. But it turns out that technology is, again, the idea of taking trying to create a particle stream, give it high energy to where it can heat or, apply energy, hopefully controlled, to like a target that had both commercial, or I say theoretical, nuclear reactor applications, also speculative space weapon applications. So we got to do those kinds of simulations. Building those kinds of machines, in essence, it's a box or a chamber with charged particles on one side, and then a series of 3 or 4 plates with holes drilled in them. And you apply voltage differences across these plates, and they draw the charged particles from one side to the next, with the goal of creating focused beams with high energy. What turns out that and when Los Alamos, well, I'll say some of the Western labs use their supercomputers to do simulations of these things. The idea is that it's better to do computer simulation before you build, because they're hard and expensive to create. It takes time and energy to build and test, put together and tear down. And so if you can get the design more correct, more optimum, that's the thing to do. Like I said, some of the big labs use their supercomputers to simulate the whole apparatus. What the person I work for figured out is you don't need to simulate the whole apparatus. You can just take one set of holes, plate in the hole, and you can simulate what goes on just in that portion of the device. And in fact, later on, he figured you don't have to do the entire hole. You can do half of it. And using a very small computer, much smaller, a VAX computer, a mini computer, you would say, we were able to do better simulations, more accurate, with far quicker and with far cheaper than the other labs that were doing with their supercomputers. Mm-hmm. The moral of the story is focus power on the most relevant part of the problem to achieve superior results at lower cost. Work smarter, not harder.
And you say focus power, which was exactly the project you were working on, right? So that's quite funny.
Right.
I'm no physicist, but yeah, I can imagine, that's amazing. And yeah, and it must save millions over time in a project, right? When you can actually get rapidly rapidly kind of prototype, but at least test that way. Okay, so
Sure.
we've mentioned this kind of in terms of teamwork and new members fresh out of college and things, and you've talked about conflict, persuasion as well, and consensus, I think, which is quite an interesting thing, in the book. So what's your go-to approach when a team's divided and tensions are high, because everyone's got a stake in something, haven't they? Everyone always protects something or other. I mean, what do you think about that?
So taking things that are in the book, it's in, there's a section on page 12 and another on page 32. Stay calm, stay cool under fire, be sensitive, stay professional. Again, when the team's divided, when tensions are high, if you're in the leadership, set expectations, objectives, and ground rules in advance, and keep it under control. For everyone, try to see the matter from the other person's point of view. Read the room. As a peer, consider trying to de-escalate. If it's a matter of opinion and no one, there's not a clear yes or right answer, you've got to come to a conclusion. But if you can de-escalate, you can reduce the drama aspect. It helps. You have to know when to pipe down and let the leadership manage communication versus trying to make your own point. More controversial items can be skipped for the moment. That can be skipped for the moment. Can be moved to a parking lot list for later consideration. If things aren't going your way, you can wait for another natural chance to make the point later in a different way. You don't have to win right then, or you don't have to lose right then either.
Yeah.
You don't. It's wise not to try to rush a resolution of the situation. Deal with all of its facets. Take more time. Take it offline. And if all else fails, better to call a pause and then escalate offline and get direction. As they say, check with the tower.
Yeah. After you've called your jets, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I get that. Okay. So in order to be able to manage a situation like that, I think people have to really sort of get to grips with being able to persuade people. I think this is what it comes down to, isn't it? Right? You persuade someone that perhaps you're not one, say like, I am not as much of a threat as they may perceive me to be, or an issue is not a threat. So what's one principle of persuasion that you believe that everyone, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether you're in high tech, magnetic bottles, physics, that sort of stuff, or cybersecurity where you come from as well. So regardless of industry, what's one principle of persuasion that everyone should master early on in their career?
I think it's master the minimum, the essence of the desired outcome. What is really matters here. If you're trying to persuade, get to the point quickly, make your point, don't belabor the point. People tend to, if according to the theory of personalities, where there are like 4 basic personality types, people try to argue and persuade the way they think versus the way the other person thinks. If you have an analytic person that likes lots of facts, and you have like a driver person in leadership, it's like, get to the point. The more facts you lay on, actually, the worse your case becomes.
Mm.
And so, again, reading the room, knowing particularly what those that are sponsoring want and need, you using that to your advantage, preparing in advance, not preparing with more, but with less. In other words, to get the better way to convey the message quicker, more efficiently, more directly, uh, to make your point, and again see where it goes.
No, well, absolutely. Well, you mentioned two of those personality types. We've got your analyticals and your drivers. Now you've got to mention the other two as well.
Yeah, your analytics and I mean, your expressives and your amiables.
There you go.
And again, you know, do you want to have fun? Do you want to be right? Do you want to get along, or do you want to get it done?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And
Exactly. I love that. Yeah, the psychology of teamwork and things like that is fascinating. So, how can someone then, if we're thinking about this, develop the ability to detect false reasoning, right? Especially in a high pressure or fast paced environment. What do you think about that?
so contradictions are the indicators of error, false reasoning. That is to say, contradictions if the entire problem scape is considered. Now, there's the story of the fake blind man and the elephant. What does an elephant look like? What's a trunk? It's a snake. It's a, it, you have to look at the whole thing. But if you're looking at the whole thing and you're considering, different descriptions, sets of facts, and so on, and you see inherent contradictions, that's an indicator that something's wrong. In the book, I quote questions from a gentleman named Daryl Huff, um, who wrote a book, funny book, How to Lie with Statistics. And he has 5 questions that he uses. I call it the baloney smell test. Who says so? How do they know? Did somebody change the subject? What's missing? Does it make sense? If you apply those to an argument, people that do this all the time, salespeople do it, political people do it, people, anyone that is trying to sell or foist or make a point, good, bad, or, it doesn't have to be necessarily nefarious, but, okay, how do you find where something's wrong? Here's a contradiction. And if you look at those 5 questions, they can help you identify contradiction. And that's the best way to look at it. Plus, there are other techniques such as using a timeline to create a sequence of events, using other techniques that can help, identify where the gaps in reasoning are.
That's again, it's applying logic, isn't it, to these things, and then trying to extrapolate from there. I mean, you touch in the book as well on meeting leadership expectations, which is something that leaders often expect but rarely say out loud, I guess. Or so, what is something? I mean, let me go through that again. Actually, this will make more sense. In the book, you touch on meeting leadership expectations. So, what's something that leaders often expect but rarely say out loud? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me take a stab at it.
Yeah.
I think the boss would tell you if they were to give you their mind, so to speak, and oftentimes you're busy and they just assume people know things. I'll preface this by saying, oddly and funnily enough, it took me a long time to learn that aggravating your leadership is not the path to career success.
Funny
You
that.
think that's obvious, but it's like, no, it's like, no, I'm gonna convince you. It's like, and I'm just like making the boss more and more agitated, and it, for several years I was dense and didn't get it. So I hope people that would read the book would get that earlier and not incur that kind of damage. But I think the boss would tell you, don't waste my time. By the way, irrelevant facts waste my time. Low value communication wastes my time. Drama and argument waste my time. They keep me from getting accomplished what I want to get accomplished. So the boss would tell you, give me what I need. Don't make me dig for it. Don't expect me to do your job. They would tell you to be the person that applies skill in a timely fashion to render maximum value. Be the indispensable person. The boss would tell you, give the requested item. They want this report or this chart or this analysis. give it to them before they ask for it again. Give it ahead of time. Um, keep a sharp eye out for due dates, for deliverables. Use calendars and reminders. Boss would tell you focus on the requirements and the outcome, not the advantages. A lot of times people will say, well, this will do this will do this. And it's like, listen, I'll make up my own mind. I just need to know the facts and what are we required to do and what's the outcome, and I'll make the value judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need you for that. Mm-hmm. The boss would tell you begin with the communication, incident, or regulation, the thing that spawned the question or the project. Begin at the beginning and then carry it through to completion. That is to say, stage completion. As we talked about, things are done in stages oftentimes. And so it's not like done, oftentimes, but it's done for now. But start at the beginning, carry it to done, and just focus on that. Mm. I think the boss would finally say, done is better than perfect, but right is better than done.
Well, yeah, there's several stages, right? Right is better than done. I remember that. I think that's the case, though, isn't it? If you're a boss, you don't have time to mess around, and you don't need all this extraneous stuff going on, right? You just need to be able to get on with it. So, okay, on the other side of that, then, when we're talking about employees or other team members or whatever, what advice do you have for someone who feels, I guess, kind of overlooked or underestimated in their workplace? Because that often would end up being a source of time wasting for a boss, where someone's constantly justifying their existence. So what would be your advice for people like that?
So I've been there myself, and depending on who you talk to, maybe I'm still there. Who knows? Anyway, my advice would be study for the person that's in that underappreciated state. Study, train up, build new skills on your time, not distracting from business or company or club objectives. Focus on the success of what you're given. The next thing that you are given, do it with excellence. In other words, if you failed at something, strive, like everything, to make the next thing a success. As they say, nothing succeeds like success. Be helpful without being a distraction. Sometimes, a person would ask questions. That's lots of questions. They think that's showing interest and attention, when from the boss's lens, you're distracting me from what I need to do. So be nice. You never know who you might have to work for later, or you might have to rely upon.
True.
But just, again, try to be valuable, be helpful, and play within the team parameters. If you can, volunteer for extra work if you're qualified or if training is available. And if all else fails and you're underappreciated, you have to be ready to move on to a better opportunity.
Yeah, but at least try from your own point of view. Right. I get
Don't
it.
give up.
Yeah, exactly. It's too easy for that to happen, isn't it? And I think impatience is a problem as well there sometimes, which I've probably been guilty of in the past. Okay, so let me ask you about yourself in projects, perhaps, or situations where you may have considered yourself as failing in those situations. I mean, how do you personally approach failure? And if ambitious professionals also fail, how should they really look at reframing those setbacks so that they're not affected in a negative way? But I can imagine what you're going to say, so I'm looking forward to hearing this.
Okay, well, anyway, it depends on the situation, of course. Now, let's theorize that it's a failure and the boss is upset, angry, okay? And you're being called in for the proverbial chewing out. Yeah. So in that case, I'd say, listen, be still. Take your beating like a man. Don't defend your action. This is one I struggle with. To avoid apologizing. I like to say sorry, 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 when in fact that's actually oftentimes the worst thing you do. Rather own the outcome. Don't rationalize. Again, strive to make the next thing a success. Um, Reflect without wallowing in, pity or whatever. Reviewing the circumstances that caused the failure, how improvements, applications of patterns, discipline practices can prevent reoccurrence. There's a view called the systemic point of view. There's a book called Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. It is really excellent about talking about how failures oftentimes happen because the structure of the system or its defects allow the failure to happen. And so if you can improve the system to where the failure mode is caught and interdicted, you can prevent it. And if you can do that to something that is a failure mode, then you can sometimes seize victory from the jaws of defeat.
And then we've got actually whole industries now, haven't we, of quality management systems and things, ISOs and all these sort of things that try and manage and mitigate those. Just doesn't, to stop these sorts of problems happening within a project, I guess. But I do like the way that you say, don't wallow in it. It's happened. You've got to move on. You've got to learn from it, and you've got to be able to take it because, it's just not a case of being in an environment where you've worked. You just can't get emotional about things like that, can you? You just have, well, not in public anyway.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if you keep a record for future reference, you can use that for periodic self-reflection. And also, this is more on the positive vein, but if you find people that are successful, if you can kind of hang in with them and pattern after them, again, as I say, iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. So it's, there's nothing wrong with patterning after someone who's successful. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
It's so important I always think so important to seek out somebody who is successful and to learn from them and to create an ally with those people as well. Yeah, mentorship, the whole shooting match, as it were. Okay, so you offer words of encouragement literally throughout. What's one line from the book you find yourself going back to even now?
So the last part of that section, I quote a woman who is the wife of a Revolutionary War soldier. It has been observed that man's extremity is God's opportunity. And again, this is in the darkest days of the American Revolution. I have a plaque on my wall that I got when I was traveling in native wood. It's written in Spanish. No temas, cree solamente. Do not fear, only believe. So I think that's the key, knowing there's a plan, there's a purpose, even adversity. If it's something that it's adversity that we can understand the cause, it's something for us to learn from, study and understand, reflect, not wallow. If it's something that we don't understand, and occasionally those happen, it's an opportunity that's being given to us to do something that we don't know what it is yet, but it will become apparent with time. And so, we just work through it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the take I put on it.
That's a really good point, actually. Everything really is a learning exercise, or, what's the thing, every day is a school day kind of thing. And you may not realize that a setback will actually help you in the future because you find a much quicker way to circumvent that issue in the future because of the experience that you've had with the setback, I'd say.
Correct.
But I didn't write the book, you did. So that all makes sense. So looking back then, is there a piece of advice you wish you'd learned earlier in your own journey? I suppose there's always something like that, isn't there?
Well, I mean, the whole book is that,
Mm,
what I
it's true.
wish I had learned earlier, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I would point out, though, is that the realization at work is nearly always teamwork. And I think we're taught in school, many of us, this vision of the lonely genius that sits and ponders and does great things, and Newton and Lavour, Pasteur, and we the way they teach it in school, it's like these people worked in a vacuum, and none of these people worked in a vacuum.
Mm.
It's only after reading a lot of more history, and I'm fond of uh, uh, British science writer James Burke. A lot of his work uh, that reinforces the notion that people do things that are connected with other people, and so you have to work in a team. And that's, if it ever was true, and I don't think it was in the past, it's certainly true today. Nothing of value gets done in total isolation. I say never, never say all, but nothing's probably an exaggeration, but all so little that it's almost nothing. Nothing gets done except team or with influence and in cooperation with others. So I'd say, okay, looking back, plan the work, work the plan. Failing the plan is planning to fail, and um, employ that structured diligence. And when things go slow, and they've been for me, that's not the time to hit the brakes. It's the time to hit the gas. And don't become discouraged, but move ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny you say about the everything has to do with teams somehow or other. I mean, I always love thinking about that in the terms of in the old days, when we lived in caves and things like that. You know, not one person, not one single person caught a mammoth, did they?
Right on.
Right, exactly. So
Indeed.
it's a whole team thing, and I think actually people do think that they can work but in isolation like that. But yeah, absolutely right. Just think about it for a minute, because that's not the case. So, okay, if you could add just one, I think this is our final question now, really, because
Okay.
we've been talking a long time about great stuff. So we need to wrap it up, unfortunately, Michael. But if you could add just one more chapter to 4040, what would it be titled? Okay. And what would it say? And I mean, it must be quite annoying because you must know exactly which chapter you'd love to add to this.
Actually, I don't. That's the thing. The last chapter is the most important, and I wouldn't tack anything to the beyond that. But I keep a lessons list even now. There are things that I thought of after writing and publishing the book, and so I keep it up almost every day. I say every day. Frequently, I add to it, and I would encourage anyone to do the same. Is keep that list. If you can take time out and structure it and organize it, fine. But one never stops learning, and so I don't know if there's another chapter that I tried to make it as complete and comprehensive as I knew how, with the sweep of things, positive and negative, time management, leadership, expectations, consensus, patterns for success, um, so on and so forth. That, but there are things that like, oh yeah, gee, I wish I thought of that before I wrote the book.
Mm.
So I write it down in my notepad.
So we'll have to see what the next installment brings in if you get that way. So,
Well, I
sorry.
hope people will get the book and like it and review it positively. And it's like, man, I'd love to do a success, another installment or a another book. Again, I've got the material on cyber risks
Mm.
and how they lurk in plain sight and so on. But I got to get past this book. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, we look forward to that one. I'm sure it'll be fascinating. You've had a wonderful career, and I think that your thoughts on management style and teamwork and project management as well, are fascinating, and people are going to get a lot from this. So, Michael, listen, thank you very much for sharing your journey and your hard-earned wisdom with us, right, in that career. 40/40 is 40 years of career life advice in 40 minutes. And it's not just a book. You've got to think of it in a different way, listeners. Think of it as a blueprint for navigating work and life with more clarity, courage, and purpose as well. So, listeners, if you're ready to sharpen your thinking, avoid costly mistakes, and make an impact in your professional world, grab your copy of 40/40 by Michael Allen Bell. It's available now wherever books are sold. So until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep walking in the bright word. Michael, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
I've enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Fabulous. Speak to you again soon, hopefully.
Okay.
Bye-bye.